Hi, welcome to a Roboflow training movie. In this training movie, I will talk about how to manage versions of assets in Cumulus. If you have catalogs with multiple versions being stored, then it might be interesting at some point to be able to clean them up, and not just manually, but actually with an automated process. If you have thousands of records and tens of thousands of versions, then at some point it might be useful for disk storage and for clarity to clean up some older versions, or in some cases it might be interesting to be able to revert a version in a controlled way, driven by maybe setting field values or things like that. So Roboflow has the ability to do that and has an instruction called process vault asset version. If you have an older version, older than version 11 of Cumulus, it might be that if you add this method, that it would add here a little triangle. There are no sub assets that will be processed. So if you don't have the latest version, maybe it's time to upgrade. There should not be a triangle. Process vault asset version does not mean that it loops through something. It just does something and reports it back in an asset log, in a text result. There is a wide variety of things that you can do. You can store number of asset versions. You can store an asset version. You can store all version info. You can store oldest version info, which means all about except the last one, the most recent, etc., etc. So you can delete based on the most recent. You can delete all except the first and the last one. You can delete if older than, for instance, a month. So there are many options of what you can delete. So you can delete or process all this. So what we can do here is, at this point I'm storing the number of asset versions. That means if you have a catalog and you want to know how many versions do I have of different assets, you can just create a report. I have a simple hot collection workflow that queries a catalog. I'm saying I'm only interested in these records, so you can put in whatever query you want, and then I'm going to write to the log what this does. Actually, this method behind the scenes uses an existing syntax asset version with then an option here, and that is actually nothing else that this is doing, but in a more understandable way and better to use in a workflow. So I'm going to run this workflow and I'm going to say start, and the workflow has been executed. If I do a show log, I can see that it has processed a number of records. And what do I get back as a result? Well, it returns me, you can see here, and this was the start, it returns a number of vaulted assets. 0, 0, these are all records that are not vaulted, but the assets are available. Here is one that doesn't return a result, which means that this is an asset that isn't even available. The file was deleted or something. And then suddenly I have some files where it says, okay, you have one version. And so this means this is a vaulted asset. And if you go on, you can see, okay, here I have one one, here I have 3 versions, and here I have 2 versions. And you can see if we go and have a look at those files, it's actually the 2 last records, you can see that if you do a version history, it actually has 3 versions. And here again, show version in history, it has 2 versions. So you can see that you can use this. Then if I close this, I can say, okay, how can I now only get the really records that I'm interested in? Well, as I mentioned before, this workflow is based on an old syntax that existed before, that you could pick up record information from using this kind of syntax. And this syntax version has multiple options: delete old, it has count, it has etc, etc. Well, this combined with the fact that Roboflow has an additional syntax possibility in the query, which is not supported by the Cumulus client, only by Roboflow, you can have an additional field value picked up, which doesn't exist, which is a Roboflow field value that only exists, and do an additional testing. This syntax is how actually Cumulus queries were looked like in Cumulus 6 and even 7, where you had these more complicated syntax of advanced queries. Well, Roboflow still supports that format and gives you the opportunity to implement an additional functionality that way. This means that if I run this query now, it will only give me the records that actually have a value, and I'm going to say bigger than 0, which means these are all my vaulted assets. So here I could say I want to run this workflow again. And I do show log. And if I have a look now, it only processes. And you can see these records, it says these were skipped by the additional query. So it ignores those. And then it says, okay, these records I'm processing. And you see, I have records 1 version, 3 versions, 2 versions. And so if we elaborate on that, you can now also select here, for instance, asset versions, but that's maybe not so interesting. But you could say, give me all version information, all the version information, show log, sorry, here, start. Show log, and here it tells me, okay, for this record I have version information, the user, when it was uploaded, version 2, version 3, so you can see, you can get information about all versions. These ones only had 1 version, so, and they didn't have a check-in comment because they weren't checked in yet. The very first version doesn't have a version info. So you can see that you can get all this information in here. Now, the most interesting functionalities are, you can say, okay, get me the most recent version, get me the oldest version, etc., etc. But the most interesting part is that you can delete. You can say delete all but most recent asset version. Delete most recent, which means, okay, that you had maybe a rejection of the latest version. Maybe it was not approved and you want to roll back to a previous version. So then you can say delete the most recent version. You could say delete all except the first and the last. You could say delete all but the most recent. You could also say, look, delete everything older than 1 month or 3 months or 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years. And so all this is very easy to obtain. So let me just say, for instance, here I'm going to say delete all but first and last version. Remember, I had one with 2 versions and one with 3 versions. So here I'm going to run this this workflow now. Start. Show log. It skips a lot of them and then it says, okay, here it does nothing, here it does nothing, but here it says I've deleted this version. This is the version I deleted. And if we have a look now for record 292.jpg, record 292.jpg, show version in history, it only has the original version and the most recent version. So that's how you can clean up your versions. If you want to say, okay, I want to delete the most recent one, remember, maybe I want to revert. So let's say I want this guy to revert. I'm going to set it to 368 in the query. And for some reason, there could be a status field saying revert, and that could be your workflow having this specific queue. So 368. In this case, it doesn't even require this. And you might also be interested when you're deleting, only saying, okay, I'm only going to process where there's more than one version. If I have more than one version, then it's useful to run this. If I don't have more than one version, then there's no point in running, trying to revert anything. So, or delete anything. Oh, sorry, making sure that I've set. So delete all except first and last. No, I want to, in this case, delete the most recent version. I want to roll back one version, actually. And it's only going to do it on one record. Show log. Ah, it says no records found. Okay. Let's go and have a look in the catalog. Information. Oh, that's not information that I need. Show version history. There's 2 here. Did I 368? Oh, I said bigger than 368 instead of equals 368. I said here bigger than. It needs to be equals. Start. Show log. And here one record, and look, that's the information you're getting back. So this file was deleted, the version 2, the most recent one was deleted. So if we have a look, the 2 has disappeared. It has reverted the record as now being the most recent file, and show version history shows that the version has disappeared. It deleted the file. So this is how you can work with the version history. So if you have any more questions about it, just let me know. Just a little reminder, as what I said in the beginning, could be that there's a little triangle here in front of it. That means it's from an older version. That doesn't really matter. if the triangle is there or not, your script will be executed correctly. So thank you for joining this little training movie, and hope to see you in the next one.